Fisher for three. Bang! He could.
This is the Tom and Jerry Sports Show.
Go! Oh! Shoots, he scores! What a play by Tavares!
What's going on, people? You're listening to another Tom and Jerry Sports Show podcast. I'll be doing it myself. Jerry, Tom is out for today, but we got a lot to talk about. You know, we have MLB opening day starting today. It actually started last weekend, but it was, you know, they started in Australia or something like that, and it was Arizona and the Dodgers. I'm not too keen on, I don't think anybody's keen on, you know, baseball playing in Australia. I don't think any of the players wanted to do that, but, you know, you can't really say anything about that as a player, but, you know, for me, I can say that. I didn't like it. You know, I know what baseball's trying to do and trying to expand the sport, just like NFL is doing, you know, taking, you know, games in London and all that stuff. I'm not a fan of that. I'm really not a fan of that. This is just the commissioners trying to make money off of other things, owners trying to make money. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's way too much traveling for a player, for a whole team, actually. I think it's just, you know, when you think about it, especially baseball, they have a 162 game season. You know, the traveling just in the United States is, you know, tough enough for, you know, players, you know, of this nature of playing, you know, at least 5 games a week out of the 7 days. So, you know, it's just, you know, going to Australia to play, it just throws off your whole, I guess, pregame and, like, you know, just your whole pattern of, you know, getting used to everything, especially in the beginning of the season, you know, just coming off of spring training and stuff like that. But that's here nor there. The Dodgers ended up taking 2 games against Arizona in Australia. The Padres played the Dodgers yesterday, Sunday night, for the official opening day, I guess you can say. The Padres beat the Dodgers. Brian Wilson didn't really have that great of an outing in the 8th inning. Ended up giving up 3 runs, one of them being a home run. But that's so far with baseball. Baseball today started every other game, really. A few other teams will play tomorrow, Tuesday. But today we have almost, I think, 12 or 15 games today. You have the Chicago Cubs playing Pittsburgh Pirates, the Royals playing Detroit, the Mets playing the Nationals, the Rangers playing the Phillies, the Braves playing the Brewers, Boston plays Baltimore, St. Louis plays Cincinnati, Minnesota plays Chicago, White Sox, Toronto plays Tampa Bay, Colorado plays Miami, San Francisco plays Arizona, and Seattle plays the Angels, and the Indians wrap up the night against the Athletics. But in other news, we had a very, very good weekend of the March Madness. Like we said last week, that, you know, the Sweet 16 is probably one of the better, you know, I guess, rounds of March Madness. That and the Elite Eight, it's probably the most competitive, and I can say that it was very competitive. It was a very, very good weekend. And now we have 4 left. We got UConn against Florida on Saturday at 6 o'clock. And then we got Kentucky against Wisconsin Saturday night at 8:50. But like I said, it was a very, very good weekend of the tournament. We had a lot of close games. And Kentucky's just showing, like we said last week, that they're not an 8 seed. They're not... They're so underrated, I guess you can say, that right now, out of the Final Four, I think they're the most complete. They're the most talented team, you know, as a whole. You know, Florida has a lot of great players, especially Wilbekin. But if you were to look at Kentucky's team right now, you would see their starting 5 is probably all NBA style, or, I guess you could say NBA talent out of all of them. You have both the Harrison twins. Julius Randle's going to go top 5, I believe, in the draft. I think he's a very, very good player. I think he kind of gives me that comparison of a Zach Randolph kind of player with the body type and everything. I just think he's a great player. But, like I said, we had a very, very good weekend. Sunday night, we had Sunday during the day, I guess you could say. We had UConn beat Michigan State, and then Kentucky beat Michigan. So, UConn was the 7th seed, Michigan State was the 4th seed, Kentucky was the 8th seed, Michigan was the 2 seed. So we have an 8 and a 7 in the Final Four. And if you really look at it, Florida and UConn, out of the last 15 years, I guess you could say they're one of the best colleges in basketball right now. Just because, this is, in the last 15 years, UConn's heading to their 5th Final Four. Florida's heading to their 4th. And UConn really hasn't had a bad, tournament loss. Probably one, but that's, in the last 15 years, that's great. You have Duke, Kansas, Syracuse that have several bad losses in the tournament in the last 15 years. And you have UConn that's pretty much only got one bad loss. But UConn right now is, I guess you can't say that they're a favorite because of Florida, but UConn's already beaten Florida this year on a Shabazz Napier buzzer beater. But I guess they're right now, they're just hot, and that's the team that you kind of want to stick with just because of their guard play. Their guard play is so well, between Boatwright and Shabazz Napier. And you could look at Florida with Wilbekin and everything, but I just feel like UConn, and we said it last week, that this team, because of their guard play, they can make it against any team. They really can. And I feel like they're going to give Florida a really, nice shot. And Connecticut, I can see pulling this game out. I can see them pulling this game out. I can see them going to the championship and, even winning it all. And against Michigan State, obviously they were in MSG, which is kind of like a third home to them. But when you're looking at it, it was just like the perfect storm for Connecticut. They had everybody in MSG, rooting for them. It was pretty much a home game. You can really say it was really a home game for them. Michigan State kind of fell apart a little bit. In the first half they were down. They ended up bringing it close at halftime. Took the lead at halftime actually, and then the second half Connecticut really just took over. Shabazz Napier 25 points in that game. So this team, just because of their guard play, can beat anybody. Really, if you really look at it, they're a 7 seed. Sometimes you look at these seedings and they can go either way. Like I said, Kentucky is not an 8 seed, but because there's so many other teams that you could just put in that number 2 and number 3, number 4, whatever. Kentucky got an 8 seed, and now they're giving everybody a run for their money in that bracket, and now into the Final Four, and they're going to go up against Wisconsin, which gave Arizona a nice game. But in that game, it kind of came down to ref play, but that, nor here, there, whatever. But Kentucky and Wisconsin, a 2 and an 8, and then Connecticut and Florida, a 7 and a 1. It's going to be a great weekend, with the Final Four and then the championship. I can't wait to see this. Definitely check it out. But we're going to get into some other news. Andrew Wiggins, like we were talking last week, we were talking about how, the questions behind Jabari Parker, Andrew Wiggins, Joel Embiid, guys like that. Do they come back for another year because they had, such a poor tournament, or as in Embiid's, position. He didn't play in it. Do they come back for another year? Well, Andrew Wiggins already cut that out. He's entering the draft this year. He announced it today. Then you got Joel Embiid, who's going to enter as well. He announced it the other day. So, looking at this draft, I just, these guys are very young, and I don't know if they're exactly going to be like one of those college greats, like right out of college. I think they need work. Andrew Wiggins, very, very athletic player. He can do, pretty much everything. Defense. He could shoot the three. He can get to the hoop. And then, you look at Jabari Parker, who's got the talent. He's got, all of that as well. I feel like these guys can get a little bit, bigger. But, I feel like they're going to be as, everybody thinks they're going to be, especially when they were talking about them in the beginning of the season. But out of all of them, probably Joel Embiid has the biggest upside because he is a 7-footer and he has that versatility to, he can shoot mid-range. He's quick enough to get out there for defense if he has to on a pick and roll or whatever it is. He can get to, the spot that he needs to be, and he's a 7-footer, so that's right there. Like, for any team, they need that. But he also did have back problems this year, which obviously held him out of the tournament. So, you can look at it all different ways. But with every sport going into the draft, it's always a risk. So you got to take that risk. And right now, you're looking at a lot of teams that are in the lottery. I do feel like Joel Embiid will go number one. It also depends on who's picking at that time. Andrew Wiggins will probably either go 1 or 2, depending on, obviously, like I said, who's going to be picking. There's a few other players. Doug McDermott, you don't know what you're going to get from him because, in college, great player in college. NBA, I don't know. He's got to work on his defensive side of the ball. You got to look at that kind of stuff. Yeah, he was averaging 27 points a game in college this year, but he's not going to average that in the NBA. We obviously know that. So he's in that kind of in between stage. Like he's a little slow, but he can shoot the ball. So off the bench, I think Doug McDermott would be great for any team, really. Will he become a starter and become a star or something like that? I don't know if you're going to get that from Doug McDermott out of college. College, he pretty much brought Creighton right to, being I think it was a number 3 seed, bringing them to a number 3 seed this year in the tournament. You got to give it to him. Pretty much, if Creighton didn't have Doug McDermott, they probably wouldn't even made the tournament. So you got to give him that. And going into the NBA, it's a total different beast. You're going to be going up against, the LeBron Jameses, the Kevin Durant's, especially at his position. He can either be a power forward / small forward. So, we'll see what happens with that. But like I said, Andrew Wiggins will be entering the draft. So it'll be interesting to see, where he goes. In other news, we had Miguel Cabrera sign close to a $300 million contract with the Tigers, an extension, really. He had 2 years left on his contract. They extended it 8 more years. He is at the age of 30, and we do look at these kind of, contracts lately, and they really haven't panned out. Yes, Miguel Cabrera, I will give it to him right now. He is the best hitter in the league, arguably the best player. That's up for grabs, really. But hitter definitely is the best hitter in the league, and you want to keep a guy like this around, obviously. But, at the age of 30, giving him a 10-year contract, it's tough. It's real tough, especially, for example, the A-Rod contract, the Albert Pujols didn't really pan out after that, that second year or third year. So I'd love to see how this pans out for the Tigers. Like I said, Cabrera, one of the greatest players to really play the game, especially, at the plate. So we'll see, what happens with that. Mike Trout, 22 years old, just turned 22 years old. 6-year contract, $144.5 million. So, I mean, this year he'll be making $1 million, and then after that, it's, he's making bank. And it's this guy was definitely could have used a 10-year contract. 6 years is still good. 10-year contract, I mean, you're looking at 32. He's still 2 years, only 2 years older than Miguel Cabrera at the end of a 10-year contract from Mike Trout at this time. But he got a 6-year contract, $144 million. That's great. That's great for the Angels to keep him around. He's going to be an upcoming star. I mean, he can do everything. I mean, his fielding is outstanding. He can hit the ball. He can steal bases. So, you got the full package with Mike Trout. And especially that he's only 22 years old is absolutely crazy. Other news, you got Maurice Jones-Drew signs a contract with the Raiders to add to some of that running game with McFadden. Sanchez signs with the Eagles. And then also in sad news, Ralph Wilson, the owner of the Bills, passed away on Tuesday at the age of 95. He was a big influence on the NFL and, especially the Bills and that whole community of Buffalo. So, our condolences go out to the Wilson family. But, talking about football, actually more news in football. Deshaun Jackson was released from the Eagles, which is kind of, surprising, especially that they were, he was on the trade block and they were getting, interest in him in a trade, with a trade. But they ended up releasing him the other day, supposedly because of gang affiliation. Now, gang affiliation can mean anything, really. It could have meant, like, his best friend when he was younger, ends up in a gang now. And, I mean, you can't... I'm not going to say, all of a sudden, being that your best friend is in a gang now, you have to lose that best friend. You can't say that with a player. Deshaun Jackson's never gotten in trouble. He's never had any... Other than, when they came out with this now... Never had any kind of gang affiliation, never got arrested, never got a DUI, DWI, whatever it is, never got, punished because of other things off the field and even on the field, really, with the Eagles. So it's kind of like a surprise that you're getting rid of him because of a gang affiliation. Like I said, that could have meant, just, a schoolmate from, like, elementary school that he still keeps in contact with that... that ended up in a gang or something like that. But, you look at it all different ways. It can go different ways. Like I said, he's never gotten in trouble. So that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't really take it so seriously. But the Eagles took it seriously. They ended up releasing him. And now you got one of the best wide receivers in the league on the free agent list. And the Redskins were meeting with him today. Also, the Bills and the Raiders are interested as well, and then supposedly there's 2 mystery teams in deep discussions with him. So we don't know who those 2, mystery teams are. We'll find out soon. But I think the Raiders are a good fit. Being that they have the money, and they're really upgrading that team, and I like what the Raiders are doing. I feel like the Raiders are going to be a decent team this year. They may even make a wild card spot, depending on what happens with McFadden. If he can stay healthy, they're in a good spot, especially with Matt Schaub. I think he's still one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Everybody talks about his pick sixes, but I mean, a lot of teams would take Matt Schaub over the quarterback that they have right now. So I think it's a good move. It is a lot of money that they had to, pay him, But other than that, I think it's a good move. You add him to, the team that they got and everybody that they added, and then you add, a guy like Maurice Jones-Drew. I think that's a great pickup to go along with McFadden. So, like I said, it's Redskins, Bills, Raiders, and then 2 mystery teams in on Deshaun Jackson. So we'll see what happens with that. We also had a lot of, I guess you could say, rule changes or, different things with the rules for the NFL. Here's a few of them. These are approved changes. The NFL goalposts were raised 5 feet. Also, bad news for Jimmy Graham. There will be no more dunking on the goalposts, which is, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, they're just taking away all the fun out of the game. I mean, why can't a guy celebrate his touchdown? Why? I mean, they already took out almost half of the stuff that any player can do. Now you're going to take away something that's been in the game for so long. Dunking on the goalpost, that's been in the game for so long. Why take it away now? But they did. Also, refs will be able to officials in New York during replay challenges, which is I think that's a great deal. You do that. Make sure you get the play right. Get the call right. That's all, any fan can ask for, especially, with big plays, big plays that can impact the end of the game, really. Also, replay judges can now review the recovery of a loose ball in the field of play, which is, they're calling it the Navarro Bowman rule. After the fumble recovery in the NFC Championship game, that was ignored on replay because it wasn't reviewable, and that was the play that Navarro Bowman ended up, tearing his knee up and all that stuff. So, everybody remembers that in the NFC Championship game, which kind of impacted that game. Seattle may not even been in the Super Bowl to win it because of that play if they would have called that right. So, I think it's a good call for this rule change. So we'll see with that. The game clock will now run after a quarterback sacks after the 2-minute warning. I don't understand what that means, but it's whatever. Roll up blocks, which is already banned from the back, are now banned from the side as well. So they're really taking away the blocks below the waist, really, and which is great because it is a dangerous play, especially you can really end a guy's career just by going low, which is one of the arguments when you're talking about the helmet to helmet problems, because now guys are so worried about going up high that they're going low and tearing a guy's knee up and ending his season or his career. So I feel like it can go either way, really, with all these rules. I think some of these rules are ridiculous, but I mean, we can't just keep ranting about how bad these rules are and how bad they're making the sport. So we're just going to keep going on with this with the rule changes. There was a few rule changes that were tabled that will be proposed, and discussed at another date. In the first 2 preseason games, the first 2 preseason weeks, the extra point will be moved to the 25-yard line. So they're going to see how that works out in the first 2 preseason games. That will, maybe end up changing for the whole season. So we'll see what happens with that. Also, there's cameras that will be installed on the goal line, end lines, and sidelines, which I feel like they should have had that from the start. I mean, there's times where you're looking at a camera view for a guy that's supposed to, break the plane of the goal line, and because it's not exactly straight on with the goal line, you can't tell. And, that can keep a guy from, scoring a touchdown and maybe even win a game or lose a game. So you got to, this is a perfect change, I feel like, if they end up making this change. Also, another tabled change was, allow teams to open or close their roofs at halftime. So I feel like that's a good deal. If you, especially guys like teams like, the Cowboys, the Colts, with the retractable roof, I feel like halftime would be fine, to change, because usually like for the last couple of years, with these retractable roofs, they said you're only allowed to make your change in the beginning of the game, before a certain amount of time before the game, and that was it. So whatever happened during that game, you got to let happen. It could end up snowing at halftime, and you had to let it open. You had to keep it open if you had it open. So now this, gives them a chance to close it at halftime if they wish to. So we'll see what happens with that if that ends up coming through. They're thinking about eliminating overtime in the preseason, which is fine. First of all, nobody watches preseason games anyway. So, eliminate overtime is fine. Let that happen. I don't understand this rule. Remove the 1 yard buffer zone for pass interference. I don't understand that rule, but it's whatever. Other motions, excluding the opening weekend of the season, allow teams to use a 49-man active roster for games that aren't played on Sunday or Monday. Also, trade players before the league year begins. Another one, conduct pre-draft timing and testing of up to 10 players at their respective facilities and attend other team testing where 3 or more draft-eligible players are present, as well as increase the size of practice squad from 8 to 10. So we'll see what happens with that. These are rejected rule changes. Let coaches challenge any decision made by an official, excluding scoring plays and turnovers. Allow replays to review personal foul calls. Move kickoffs to the 40-yard line. And I believe that's it. Then lurking rule changes. There's a few, not many. So we'll just, let it go. But other than that, you look at all these rule changes. I think this is perfect for the NFL. I think this has to happen. One of the rule changes that was rejected, I wish they would really look into, allow replays to review personal fouls, because some of these personal fouls that they got are a little ridiculous. You got a guy like I feel like they should be able to review helmet to helmet and stuff like that, because how many times have you actually watched the game and a guy gets hit in the shoulder, like a helmet to the shoulder, and they've called it a helmet to helmet, and this is a 15-yard penalty and you get an automatic first down. Like anything over 10-yard penalty, I feel like should be reviewed, especially like a pass interference. Pass interference, that could end up being a 60-yard flag. So, when you're looking at that, I think it's just those have to change. I think, really Goodell has to look into that. But we've, me and Tom have always expressed how much we don't like Roger Goodell and how much he's ruining the game. We understand the whole safety factor and everything, and that's all dandy, whatever. You want to make it you want to make it safer for the players, go right ahead, but some of these rules are ridiculous, and some of these things that they're doing, they're talking about maybe even taking extra points out of the game, which is they're looking at the percentage of how much people miss it and how many people make it, and obviously it's a huge percentage towards making it, obviously, because it's a chip shot. But there's times where a team has missed the extra point and it has come back to hurt them in the long run. So it's part of the game. Leave it in the game. Let that stuff stay. And I feel like they should move back the kickoff to where it was, even though, people are taking it out of the end zone anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But I just feel like, you got to take it back to where it was. Bring back the game, the football game that used to be. And it's whatever. I mean, this is just my opinion on the game of football. But other than that, we'll talk about some basketball news. The Knicks have brought it back to one game behind the Atlanta Hawks, but the Atlanta Hawks are just terrible. They've lost 6 straight. And like we said last week, we were going off on how bad the Eastern Conference is. And I mean, if you really look at this, the Knicks are one game behind, and their record is 31-43. They're 12 games under 500, and they're one game behind the 8th seed. That can't happen. That cannot happen. That's not good for the Eastern Conference. I mean, Indiana, like right now, this is if we were to just take away every other team, it would just be more sensible for this. There's no reason to play anything in the playoffs because we know it's going to be Indiana and Miami. Indiana has fell off, the last couple of weeks. They're only up a game now on Miami, and Miami's, staying a little. They're 6-4 in the last 10 games. Indiana's 5-5. So this is the make or break time for Indiana because you're looking at losing home field advantage for the whole playoffs, and which they kind of desperately need against a team like Miami, definitely. So you're looking at Indiana, Miami, and then you look at Toronto, Chicago, Brooklyn, Washington, Charlotte, Atlanta. And I mean, the Cleveland Cavaliers can make the playoffs at 30-45 right now. It's absolutely insane that these teams can make the playoffs. And then you look down at the Western Conference, and Dallas, which is the 8th seed, at 44-30. 44-30. Memphis is out of the playoffs at 43-30. It's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. So, I mean, you look at Denver. Denver's 32-41 in 12th place in the Western Conference. They'd be in, they would be in almost 7th place in the Eastern Conference. Memphis, which is in 9th place in the Western Conference at 43-30, would be in 3rd place in the Eastern Conference. They're not even going to make the playoffs, Memphis. They might not even make the playoffs. So it's crazy how different Western Conference is to the Eastern Conference. Eastern Conference is just 2 teams. That's all you're going to get is 2 teams. I don't even know why, Knicks would even want to make the playoffs because they're not going to do anything. Atlanta's not going to do anything. Charlotte's not going to do anything. Washington's not going to do anything. Brooklyn maybe has a chance. Chicago has a chance. I don't think Toronto's going to have a chance. So it's just, it's crazy how, to think how bad the Eastern Conference is compared to the Western Conference. But in other news, I mean, Kevin Love, brought out a few other teams to his, maybe possible destination after his 2015 free agency. He brought in, I think, Chicago and New York. So we'll see what happens with that. But also rumors have it that the Lakers may trade their lottery pick for Kevin Love, especially after he absolutely crushed them the other day with a triple-double. So we'll see what happens with that. Like I said, Pacers are falling apart. 76ers finally snapped their 26-game losing streak against Detroit with a 25-point win over Detroit. So, you never know what's going to happen. Philadelphia, after a 26-game losing streak, still is not in last place in the Eastern Conference. Milwaukee's worse than them. How is a team with 26-game losing streak still ahead of someone? How is that possible? Milwaukee's 14-59. So, especially, and this is what we were talking about, with, the guys that are entering the draft this year, especially, freshmen like Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker. Why would you even want to even have the chance to, get drafted by a team like the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, these guys are not going to change any of these teams to winning teams. They're not that good of players. They're not a LeBron James. They're not a Kobe Bryant. They're not, a Kevin Durant to take a team by themselves and end up taking them to, a playoff spot. Andrew Wiggins is good. Jabari Parker's is good. Joel Embiid, very good. But they're not going to take Milwaukee from a 14-59 season to a, in the Eastern Conference, you can make the playoffs at 31-41. So, they're not going to get them up to that. They're not that good. They're very, decent players, and maybe after a while they'll end up becoming that star, but right now they're not. So we'll see what happens with this draft. And then in hockey, we had a few. We got some big news, especially centered around me and Tom, especially because we're Islander fans. The Islanders may be being sold by, Charles Wang. Charles Wang is looking for around $300 million to sell the team. So, in my opinion, I would love to see Prokhorov, the owner of the Nets, take over the Islanders because he does have a lot of money. He likes to spend the money. The Islanders needed an owner that will spend the money for them. They're going to be in Nassau Coliseum for one more year. They're moving to Brooklyn after that. Do I think, whoever he sells the team to can end up, changing that whole deal with Barclays Center. So we'll see what happens with that. That should be interesting. But other than that, this could be big news for Islander fans, especially. Something like that. You want to see your team. You love to see your team spend money. You just ask Met fans. Met fans hate that their owners don't spend money, and then when they do, it's not on the guys that they would like to be spending money on. So you want an owner like a Steinbrenner, guys like that will spend their money, get their team to spend their money on smart players. Steinbrenner had his problem with spending a lot of money on older players, but now Cashman's being smarter with those older players. He's getting older players that can make a difference on this team, and they've showed, for example, Raul Ibanez, took us through that first series that we ended up losing. But actually, I think they made it to the second round in that playoffs. But that's just, when you look at it, it's just, you're spending your money smart. As, Brian Cashman, he does spend his money very well. And I have to give that to him. In the NHL, we have a few more games left. Not many. We're looking at, right now, we're looking at the playoffs looking like Boston in first, Pittsburgh, Montreal, Tampa Bay, Rangers, Philadelphia, and Detroit. Then in the Western, you pretty much almost have the whole playoffs set out already. I think there's one more spot to be given out. Right now it's St. Louis, Anaheim, San Jose, Colorado, Chicago, Los Angeles, and maybe Minnesota and Phoenix. So we'll see what happens with that. But I can't wait for the hockey playoffs, because the hockey playoffs is just so, crazy to watch. It's fun to watch. And it's one of the most competitive playoffs, and interesting playoffs in all of sports. So definitely keep an eye on that. It should get interesting from here, especially in the Eastern Conference. A lot of teams are close, unlike the NBA Eastern Conference. But that will do it for the Tom and Jerry Sports Show podcast. I'm Jerry. Be breezy. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Tom and Jerry Show.